The year is 1347. In the sun-drenched port of Messina, Sicily, the air is thick with the scent of salt and commerce. Life moves to a familiar rhythm, dictated by the arrival and departure of ships that are the lifeblood of the city. But this autumn, that rhythm is broken. On the horizon, a ghost fleet of 12 Geno's trading galleys appears, drifting toward the harbor with an unnatural slowness. As they draw closer, a dreadful silence emanates from their decks. When the ships finally dock, a scene of unimaginable horror is revealed to the gathered crowd. Most of the sailors are dead, their bodies piled in the holds, already turning black. The few who still cling to life are specters, delirious with fever, their bodies racked with violent shudders, and on their skin, in their armpits and groin, are the dark, swollen boils that will soon lend the disease its name, the Black Death. The port authorities react with a panicked, desperate speed. They understand that this sickness, whatever it is, came from those ships. They order the galleys back out to sea, an act akin to trying to unring a bell. The disease is already ashore. It moves not like a flood, but like a vapor, an invisible predator leaping from the dying sailors to the horrified dock workers, and from them into the heart of the city. The symptoms are terrifyingly efficient: a raging fever, convulsions, and the swift appearance of the black buboes. Death is not a possibility, it is a near certainty, arriving within a few agonizing days. It is a pestilence that mocks the most learned doctors and scoffs at the most fervent prayers. Priests who administer last rites and physicians who offer remedies are often the first to fall. This is not a known malady. This is an alien terror, a divine judgment. As the death ships drift away to seed other ports with their lethal cargo, the people of Messina are left with the chilling realization that the enemy is already inside their walls, and it has just begun its relentless, silent march across their world. As the plague exploded from the coasts into the heartlands of Europe, it unleashed a second, equally virulent contagion: fear. This fear didn't just kill the spirit, it tore apart the very fabric of society. The most sacred human bonds dissolved overnight. Healthy parents, mad with terror, abandoned their sick children to die alone. Husbands and wives fled from each other at the first sign of a cough. Entire towns became hostile territories where neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, and the sight of a stranger could provoke a violent panic. Priests, who were meant to be shepherds, bolted the doors to their churches, terrified of infection, leaving millions to face their final moments without the comfort of the sacraments. The living, as one Italian chronicler wrote, were scarcely enough to bury the dead. The rituals of life were replaced by the logistics of mass death. Into this abyss of collapse and desperation, a new figure was born, a professional created by the very chaos that was destroying everything else: the plague doctor. To understand this bizarre apparition, one must first understand the flawed science that created him. The most respected medical minds of the 14th century were dominated by the miasma theory. They believed the pestilence was a miasma, a corrupted, foul-smelling air that rose from swamps, decaying corpses, and even certain alignments of the planets. To fight the plague, you had to purify the air or protect yourself from breathing it in. When the plague struck a city, the most esteemed. Physicians, those who served the rich and powerful, were often the first to flee. This left a vacuum. Desperate city councils and monarchs began to hire doctors on special, highly paid contracts. These were not the best of the best. They were often second-rate physicians, young surgeons with little experience, or sometimes outright charlatans who were willing to risk an almost certain death for a small fortune. Their contract was simple. They were to treat all members of the community, rich and poor alike, a radical departure from the class-based medicine of the time. And to do this, they donned their now legendary uniform. This was not a costume of fantasy. It was a primitive biohazard suit, designed piece by piece according to the miasma theory. The long overcoat was made of heavy leather, waxed to make it impermeable to the infectious air. They wore leather gloves, boots, and a wide-brimmed hat, signs of their profession. They carried a long wooden staff, a multi-purpose tool used to examine patients without touching them, to push away the desperate crowds, and to direct gravediggers. And most famously, there was the mask, a haunting, bird-like visage with a long, hollow beak and glass eyepieces. This beak was not an artistic choice. It was a primitive respirator. It was stuffed with a potent cocktail of aromatic herbs and spices: camphor, mint, cloves, myrrh, and rose petals. The theory was that these powerful, pleasant smells would overwhelm and purify the deadly miasma before it could be inhaled. In a world plunged into darkness, this strange figure, reeking of flowers and spices, became the official face of medicine, a walking symbol of humanity's desperate, flawed, and terrifying fight for survival. The world under the plague became a crucible where every aspect of human nature was tested and boiled down to its essence. The fight against the pestilence was waged on three terrifying fronts. The first was the war on the body, a battle fought by the plague doctors with tools of ignorance and desperation. Their treatments were a catalogue of horrors, each born from a fundamental misunderstanding of the enemy, believing the disease was an imbalance of the body's humors. They would drain the lifeblood from their patients through cutting or the application of leeches. They saw the buboes not as a symptom, but as the root of the poison, and would lance them with scalpels, an agonizing procedure that released a wave of infectious material. They prescribed tonics of arsenic, mercury, and crushed gemstones, hoping to poison the disease before it poisoned the patient. They would even practice trepanation, drilling holes into a person's skull to release the supposed evil vapors. Each failed cure only deepened the despair, proving that the physical body was a fortress that had already been breached and could not be defended. The second front was the war for the soul. As medicine failed, humanity turned to God, but God seemed to be silent. This silence sparked a wave of religious hysteria unlike anything seen before. The most visible manifestation was the flagellant movement. Processions of hooded figures, sometimes thousands strong, would march from town to town, chanting prayers and whipping themselves with leather scourges tipped with iron. They believed the plague was a divine punishment, and only through extreme, bloody penance could they atone for the sins of the world. But their rival was a terror in itself, spreading panic and often the plague itself, the established church, its own authority crumbling as priests died in droves, condemned the movement, but was powerless to stop it. It offered its own solutions: prayer, processions, and the selling of indulgences that promised a swifter path to heaven. For those who died of the plague, a form of spiritual profiteering in the face of apocalypse, when prayer and penance also failed. The third and most brutal front opened, the war on the other. A terrified society needed a tangible enemy, a human face to blame for an invisible horror. In one of the darkest chapters of European history, that face became the Jewish people. A vicious conspiracy theory erupted across the continent, accusing Jews of orchestrating the plague by poisoning the wells of Christian communities. This lie, fueled by centuries of anti-Semitism and often promoted by debtors seeking to erase their obligation, led to horrific pogroms. In Strasbourg, 2,000 Jews were burned alive on a giant wooden platform. In cities across the Rhine Valley, entire Jewish populations were annihilated. Through this three-front war on the body, the soul, and the scapegoat the plague doctor walked, he was a witness to it all. The failure of his own science, the madness of faith, and the boundless cruelty of fear. At its absolute zenith, the great mortality was not simply a crisis. It was a complete inversion of the known world. The fundamental order of life and death was turned upside down. The daily rhythm of a medieval city, once marked by church bells and market calls, was replaced by the rumble of the death cart and the gravediggers' cry, "Bring out your dead." The air, once filled with the smells of baking bread and livestock, was now thick with the cloying sweetness of decay and the smoke of vast, continuously burning plague pits. The normal rituals of passing a family vigil, a proper burial, became impossible luxuries. The dead were stripped of their identity and became mere cargo, dumped into mass graves without ceremony or prayer, their numbers so great that they were layered like bricks with dirt. This inversion of life also upended the structures of power. The plague was a terrifyingly democratic killer. It infiltrated the most heavily guarded castles and the most sacred monasteries. It struck down Joan of England, daughter of King Edward III, as she traveled to her own wedding in Castile. It claimed Eleanor, the Queen of Aragon, while King Philip VI of France survived. His wife, Queen Joan of Burgundy, did not. This chaos at the top created power vacuums and succession crises across the continent. The machine of government, which relied on a clear chain of command, sputtered and died as its officials, from local sheriffs to royal ministers, were consumed by the pestilence. The law became unenforceable, and in many places, society reverted to a state of primitive survival. This societal breakdown triggered a stark inversion of morality. Faced with the near certainty of a swift and agonizing death, the population split, while some, like the flagellants, turned to extreme piety. Others swung to the opposite pole of nihilistic hedonism. The Italian writer Boccaccio, in his masterpiece **The Decameron**, describes nobles who fled to country villas to wait out the plague, passing the time by telling bawdy, irreverent stories. Others who remained in the cities gave themselves over to debauchery, believing that if their time was short, it should be spent in pleasure, the moral fabric woven over centuries by the church. and feudal law unraveled in a matter of months. And then, after years of this unrelenting horror, the wave finally broke, not with a crash, but with a slow, eerie ebb. The pestilence receded, leaving a continent in a state of profound shock. The survivors standing amidst the ruins of their old world, deafened by the sudden, terrible silence. The world that survived the Black Death was a world forever altered, its future defined by the unintended will and testament of the plague. The first and greatest inheritance was economic. For centuries, the wealth of Europe had been consolidated in the hands of a small nobility, built on the cheap, abundant labor of a massive peasant class. The plague annihilated this system. With up to half the population gone, the value of labor skyrocketed. The surviving peasants and craftsmen found themselves in a position of unimaginable bargaining power. They demanded and received higher wages, lower rents, and an end to feudal obligations. This seismic shift in wealth from the landed gentry to the working class triggered a series of popular uprisings, like the Peasants' Revolt in England, and lit the slow-burning fuse that would eventually destroy the feudal system itself. The cultural inheritance was just as profound. The plague had delivered a devastating blow to the authority of the medieval church. Its prayers, processions, and holy relics had proven utterly powerless, shaking the faith of millions. This crisis of belief helped pave the way for the scientific skepticism and human-centered philosophy that would define the Renaissance. Having seen the divine world fail them so completely, thinkers and artists began to turn their focus back to the human world, to science, art, and the potential of man. The horror of the plague, in a dark and paradoxical way, cleared the ground for the rebirth of Western culture. Yet, the psychological inheritance was a legacy of fear. The Black Death was not a one-time event. It returned in smaller, but still terrifying, waves for the next 300 years. The memory of the Great Mortality was seared into the collective consciousness of Europe. And with that memory, the image of the plague doctor became immortalized. He evolved from a real, historical figure into a folkloric omen of death. A boogeyman who appeared in carnival costumes and cautionary tales. He was not a savior, but a symbol of a world grappling with a terror it could not understand, and a testament to our eternal, often desperate, instinct to confront the darkness. Even if our only tool is a mask filled with flowers, this commitment to face the unknown, to fight disease even when the odds seem impossible, is his true, enduring legacy.